Hello, everybody, and welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Monday, the 6th of October. Glad to see you. I'm going to talk about something that might start sounding political, and I don't intend it to. It's about political situations, but at the same time, I really think it's about humanity and how we treat each other. Last week, the American government went into shutdown because they couldn't agree on, they couldn't pass a budget. And we also saw a week and a half ago Canada Post go on strike. And since then, I have heard a lot of rhetoric, both from American news and Canadian, and lots of Canadian people chiming in about, especially about the Canada Post strike, talking about, the pros and cons. There are people who think that Canada Post should strike and that the government does need to the government and states needs to pay closer attention to the actual people whose jobs are at risk and who aren't getting paid. And then there are people who are angry that Canada Post went on strike. How dare they? And for those people who think that it's just Republicans and Democrats fighting and scrapping and being greedy that's causing all these problems. Well, the thing is, I think there's a little bit of both in everything. And I think it's important that we take a look at those things. Focusing on Canada Post, for instance, people are on strike because of many things. Wages, they don't get paid enough. There's too much work, not enough people to do the work. The technology is moving fast and changing the world of the post. The Canada Post hasn't really kept up with it, and I'm not a big fan of most of the state's things. I like the way Canada does things, but I think the U.S. Postal Service has over time figured out how to deal with things like at-home shopping and parcel deliveries and computer things and really caught up and tried to keep pace with the changing technology. Canada Post, not so much. Now, that being said, there are significant portions, and I'm telling you, significant. Most of Canada, let me finish my sentence. Significant portions of Canada live north of where easy access to postal outlets and internet for those kind of things that might be done that way work. Yes, the bulk of Canada lives sort of along the St. Lawrence Seaway, 401 Trans-Canada Highway, sort of in the southern 1/4 of our country where the bulk of the cities are. But there are a lot of people in Canada who live north of that particular parallel. And as I can attest to, for instance, internet is not a given in many places. Just simply driving to the Pas, which is 6 hours north of Brandon, and certainly all the way up to Thompson, which is about 10 hours north of Brandon, there are many places where there is no cell service whatsoever, let alone people in their homes or businesses having high-speed internet service where they can access things, where they could do computer banking or recognize that their checks are being deposited into their banks automatically, but they're not able to do computer banking to be able to pay their bills. Most businesses, utilities want people to go online to pay their bills. Well, these are a lot. There are swaths of people, whole communities of people in the northern parts of Canada, which is most of Canada, who aren't able to do that. They rely on the paper bill coming to them so that they can go to the bank, which may be remote or quite a drive from them, so that they can simply go and pay their utility bills or write checks, make sure that they have the groceries they need. This assumption that everyone has equal access to the internet, and hence then to some of the things that people are saying that Canada Post doesn't need to be around for, that most of the things are being done by email. Well, that's just not true. Christmas cards for people in the north are not, the lady on here who does the e-cards, they're actually Christmas cards with stamps on them because they have to mail them at their local post office, which is often anymore not in their own community because more and more of our rural post offices are closing. And then we have the issue of those rural post offices. Think about what it means to a community when your industry leaves, when your local employer, maybe a construction company or a factory closes down. Well, then there's families out of work or moving away. And when families are out of work or move away, then you look at schools start to get fewer and fewer students in them. And those students then have to go further and further away to go to school because because they close the schools down, or they limit the availability of courses within the schools. Well, once the schools close down, quite often things like banks close, and then the post office closes. And then what have you got left? You've got a community that has a legion, and they have the town hall, and hopefully they still have a library, probably run by volunteers. And they have, the local bake shop or coffee shop where people gather because guess what? People still live there. Just because all of the amenities in town dry up and move away doesn't mean that the farmers can simply move into a different town, or those people who have homes which are no longer really marketable can simply pick up stakes and follow the work. We're decimating our communities, which means there's whole communities of people who are hurt. And so things like closing rural post offices becomes a big issue. When our folks go on strike, there's many people who disagree with unions and labor action and people going on strike. And my hunch is that they're probably people who have never had to work extra overtime, people who have never had to work Christmas or Easter or Christmas Eve or New Year's when their kids are home, people who have never understood what it is when the prices are going up but your wage isn't because your employer refuses to increase it and you have no bargaining power. Unions can do wonderful things because they help keep the society's eyes on what is right and fair. Now, there are times when unions go too far, when they are asking too much. And, it's back and forth. There's no good guys and bad guys here. There's no white hats and black hats. This isn't an old-style Western. This is a nuance of grayscale, where we all need to recognize we need to go to the table and negotiate. We have to say, okay, here's my pie-in-the-sky ask, but here's what I'm willing to do to get in the middle. And the other side has to come to the table and say, this is our absolute bottom line. We can't go higher than this, but we're willing to have conversations about benefits, or we're willing to have conversations about hours worked, or even just the way the circumstances, the environment in which our people work. We don't have sweatshops in Canada. We have laws that keep us from hiring children and paying them pennies an hour to do the work that adults could do. And there are many people in business who would disagree and say that would be a good business model. I would argue that they are absolutely wrong. We need to not take advantage of the people of our society, but we need to find ways to help people make a living, be able to contribute to society, both at work, but also because they come home from work and they still have energy because they haven't worked an 18-hour day and they're getting paid a living wage, which means they can put the groceries on the table and pay for a mortgage on a house they can afford, and they can afford to put their kids in soccer or participate in public utility things like computer classes or babysitting classes for teenagers because they have enough expendable money that they can use that money. They can go to hockey games or to the local carnival in the winter. But if we don't have unions doing the work of standing up for the little guy, so to speak, then we would be out of luck, wouldn't we? Because we don't yet live in a world where the billionaires and the millionaires are recognizing that they don't have to make so much money on the backs of the lower levels of society, that maybe they could go by with a little less so they could put a little bit more into their companies and work could get done in a humane way. So and the same thing is happening in the States. as they look at shutting down the shutting down of the government and the arguments about Medicare. We need to find that balance, not to say that having wealth is wrong, but also to not say that not having wealth is wrong. We need to find a balance in humanity in which unions can walk side by side with checks and balances with corporations, where the lower income levels of our society can participate fully in society because they're making enough money, and where the higher levels of income can still have their jets and their yachts and their 6-month vacations in the Barbados or wherever it is they go, but that they're not doing that on the backs of the people who can't. You can't take it with you. But at the same time, if you haven't got it, you can't do anything with it. We need to find a balance. So as the government and the labor union for the post office works out the details and figures out what's best, may cooler heads prevail. May they recognize that there are people across this country who don't have easy access to just going into the bank or paying online for bills that would cripple them if this postal strike goes on too long. Mortgage payments that are due, and they usually pay by mail with a check. Other people who have taxes owing who can't pay by computer. People who need their paycheck, which is delivered to them through the mail. The same thing in the States for all the people who are not being paid right now. They need their living. We need to stop playing silly games, seriously come to the table, and acknowledge that both sides have a point, and then work from there. So my prayer today is that God will move in the hearts and minds of all those immovable and hardened hearts of stone on both sides of every table, that they might be softened and come to a place where they recognize that this really is about humanity. It's not about personal gain or pride or even politics. Please pray for good outcomes for all the people on both sides of the 49th parallel, and in particular for those who are at the 50th and 53rd and 55th and 57th and 59th and all the other parallels in Canada who are suffering from this postal strike. Have a great day. God bless you, and I will see you again tomorrow for Church at Home with Rachel.